Good morning. I'm James Baker with the Public Sector Technology Exchange. I'm your moderator today, and I want to thank each of you for taking time to come to this thought leadership panel on big data, telecom, and security in the state of California. Before we get started today, we have a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over with you. If you could kindly silence your tablet, phone, I'd be much obliged. We're also going to record today's event. Bathrooms are located out the hallway to the left. Your questions are welcome, but let me share with you a little bit how our format will go. I have some questions that I'm going to be doing with the panel at the beginning of the event. Right about the top of the hour, we're going to open it up to you, the audience, to dialogue with them, and I'll come around with a wireless mic and I can take your comments then. Last thing, as you're getting ready to depart today's event, surveys were handed out to you at the beginning. If you could take a few minutes to give us some feedback, it'd be very appreciated. And for anyone that fills out those surveys, we'll validate your parking as well as give you a Pete's Coffee and Tea gift card for a cup of coffee. An event like this just doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of things that come involved. We're very fortunate today to have our esteemed panel who's taking time out of their busy schedules to come and talk to you about some of these issues. You know, we're all in this era of doing more with less and it being more and more secured on whatever device that the citizen wants to engage us with on. But today's event would not have been possible without our sponsors, and I'd like to acknowledge Integra Telecom and Canes. Right now, Hawken Osteford, who's their senior government executive, is going to come up and say a few words about Integra. Hawken?
Thank you, Jimmy. Great to see everyone here today. Thank you for your attendance. Integra is very pleased to be a major sponsor of today's Public Sector Technology Exchange panel discussion, focusing on security and big data. And I want to first of all thank our panel of esteemed speakers for their participation today. Thank you. Integra has a long-standing history of providing services to the public sector. And with our purchase of ELI in 2006, this gave us a tremendous amount of fiber on the West Coast, which we are leveraging for extremely cost-effective, high-quality telecom solutions. In fact, just in Sacramento, we have 58 state agencies connected with our fiber. Unfortunately, with the CalNet 1 and CalNet 2 agreements being sold source, those assets were essentially locked up. However, we are very pleased to announce that we've been awarded multiple categories on the CalNet 3 agreement. We are awarded in IFB-A, which is the first third of the CalNet 3 categories, 1.2 and 1.3. 1.2 is your VPN, MPLS, converged VoIP, and SIP solutions. And 1.3 is your standalone VoIP, where we manage all components end-to-end. In IFB-B, which is our second third of the CalNet 3 categories, we are awarded 3, 4.1, 4.2, and 5. 3 is your Ethernet private line services, where we are MEF certified. 4.1 is your Sonnet rings. 4.2 is your Sonnet-based private line. And 5 is your internet connectivity. With the internet connectivity, for example, we are one of only 2 vendors to be awarded that category. And with the category 4.1, we are the only vendor to be awarded that category. Just a couple key differentiators on the Integra network. One, we're incredibly diverse. We ride atop of the high-tension power towers via utility right-of-ways, hence the name electric lightwave. These right-of-ways are furnished via agreements with WAPA, Western Area Power Authority, PG&E, and Southern California Edison. This diversity allows us to provide incredibly resilient disaster recovery solutions, whereas your typical telecom vendor is in the highway and railroad right-of-ways. Also, our solutions with our fiber is incredibly seismic resistant, which is important, especially here in California. And we have the lowest mean time to repair in the industry. If we have a fiber break on our fiber network, we can quickly roll out our teams to make the repair versus having to dig up the ground, look for the break, and then make the repair. We are very pleased to be able to compete for your business via the new CalNet 3 agreement. Very happy to see you here today, and I would like to let you know that we have a table out in the back where we can answer any questions that you might have. Again, thank you for your attendance, and I hope you enjoy today's event. With that, I'd like to hand over the mic to our strategic partner, CANS, and Mark Fidel. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm glad there wasn't a height requirement because I would have failed that issue. Hakan, thank you for your introduction, those kind words. My name is Mark Fidel. I'm the president of Computational Analysis and Network Enterprise Solutions, and we're changing our name later in the year. We go by the acronym CANS. We are a partner to Integra Telecom, and we provide cybersecurity assessment services and vulnerability management tools that help the enterprise understand what's going on the network, what's going on in key and enterprise-wide applications in terms of vulnerabilities, where they are, what to do with them, how to fix them, and how to manage the remediation processes. Thank you for the panelists. There's some breadth and depth here today. So I really hope that you appreciate the time that these folks are going to be able to spend with you today. And again, Jimmy, thank you for a wonderful event, and PSTE, appreciate the time.
I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. And I said for the next portion of our program, I'll be interviewing them with some questions I have. And then, like I mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to interact. But we'll go ahead and start. Scott, if you would kindly introduce yourself, tell us your name, what you do at California Highway Patrol, and then David will just go right down the line to everyone. Scott?
Thank you. My name is Chief Scott Howland with the California Highway Patrol. I am the chief of our Information Management Division, and my responsibilities encompass our computers, computer applications, our computer network, as well as making sure we provide those services to over 100 offices across the state. In addition, we have a fleet of about 3,000 patrol cars that, of course, I provide that infrastructure to also. Also get to oversee our telephones as well as our statewide radio network and statewide traffic records. So a few things within my jurisdiction there. Relatively new to my job, been in this position since May 1st, came from San Luis Obispo, so I'm still adjusting to the weather here. Slightly warmer, but I'm working on it. And I think it was a cruel joke. Within my first month, our air conditioning went out, so my office was 97 degrees. And I'm like, coastal guys don't like that, but very happy to be here.
My name is David Noronha, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at the California Department of Insurance. I've been with the Department of Insurance for nearly 4 years. Department of Insurance regulates the insurance industry in California, consumer services, consumer protection, enforcement, big pieces of our charge, and the entire sphere, that is from voice over IP to our infrastructure, applications, all kind of falls under me. And prior to this, I used to work for the correctional healthcare in clinical applications.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Cleek, and I work for Franchise Tax Board, everyone's favorite. Thank you for your help. I'm Kathy Cleek, and I work for Franchise Tax Board, everyone's favorite tax organization. I mean, Brenda might object to that, but I've been the CIO at Franchise Tax Board for 9 years, and I came to this role from the business side. I'm a CPA and have been a project management professional and done projects, and migrated over into the CIO role. And FTB has a very robust technology organization. We don't do anything without automating it, it feels like. We have our own data center, build many of our own applications. We also have a 600-seat call center and a website that we maintain that gets 15 million hits a year.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Fleming, and I'm the CIO for the, can you guys hear me? Yeah, I'm getting feedback, for the State Board of Equalization. I've been with the board now, actually this month is my 3rd year anniversary. I had over 20 years, along with Barney Gomez, at the Legislative Data Center as one of the deputy directors there. So at the Board of Equalization, as you know, we are also a tax administration revenue collection agency, and partnering with Kathy, we bring in a significant portion of the state's budget. BOE has been around for quite some time, was established back in previous century, offering property and sell property taxes, basically rail cars, et cetera, and timber and tax. We've then expanded significantly and now have over 30 tax programs. So it keeps us busy. And those tax programs are modified and amended at any point of the year through the legislative process, so we stay quite busy. At the board, my IT department, we have about 250 people in our department. We've got a pretty healthy, and I see some representatives from our telecom department here. So we too have a robust organization, about 5,500 employees throughout the state of California. We also have offices in Houston, New York, and Chicago. So we stay quite busy. We're just laughing the other day. We're looking at all the projects in our portfolio, and currently we're sitting at about 150 projects in our portfolio, if that gives you any scope of what we've got going on. And it's an election year. The board has a body of 5 elected officials that sit on top of our organization. We are the only tax administration that has an elected body that governs us. So there are 4 directly elected, and of course the controller sits at large. It's a pleasure to work here. I'm really enjoying it and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel.
Good morning. My name is Barney Gomez. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Healthcare Services. We support probably around 10,000 nodes up and down the state of California. My main responsibility is the overall operations as well as new technologies to the Department of Healthcare Services. One of the biggest support that we provide is to the Medicaid system for the state of California. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you very much.
David Gray, Director of Government Education for Integra, manage their organization of sales professionals across the country, specifically tailored to government education. And I get to see lots of different perspectives from the various states, and primarily out here in the West, and how they're doing their consolidation of data center efforts, their virtualization of machines, trying to do everything faster, better, and ultimately cheaper, and seeing some successes, some pitfalls, and I'm excited to be here and participate with you folks in this forum, and perhaps give some insights as to what may be happening in some of the neighboring locales here in the West when it comes to some of the problems that are being faced. Spent many years as an intelligence community contractor in the information assurance and data collections business. And so I have some unique perspectives, as you know, that's been a hot topic in the news lately. And I did attend school in California, a UCLA grad, alum, woohoo, for my master's degree, and also in the National University of Singapore. So I got a couple perspectives on different sides of the pond as to various information states that may occur. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Gigi Smith, Chief Information Officer for CalTRANS. I've been at CalTRANS a whole year and a half at this point and have loved every minute of it. We support about 20,000 CalTRANS workers throughout the state of California. We have about 12 data centers, do our best to keep the highways safe and sound. Our most recent success has been the Bay Bridge, and it's even more successful after the earthquake, and there was no damage, so we're really proud of all of the efforts. This is my 3rd stint as a CIO within the state of California. I've got about 28 years in. Of course, I only started when I was 10 years old. So. And during that time, I've seen the state grow. I've seen it evolve. One of my passions and areas of interest is always in the area of personnel. With the large number of retirements stemming from baby boomers, you know, that always concerns me. It's going to leave a void in a lot of the senior ranks. And so I'm always concerned, what's going to happen? Who are we going to fill these positions with? And I think it's going to be important for all of us to coach, to mentor, to help provide the guidance and help to bring others forward. So that's one of the things I'm always looking for. Within CalTRANS, we're always looking for a few good men and women. And so this is going to be my plug. If you are looking for any opportunities, you want to work for an organization that is progressive, innovative, efficient, and effective, come see me. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Stacey Savidge. I'm the Chief of IT Infrastructure. I work for Gigi. So I'm very recent to CalTRANS. I came from covered California, and prior to that, private industry. My background is came from California State University, Chico, with an MIS degree, and then picked up my master's while I was working in private industry, so in MBA in technology. And so that really has been my whole career in the IT area. But the infrastructure for CalTRANS is not just here in Sacramento, but it does go statewide. So as Gigi indicated, 12 data centers and the connectivity in between all of those. Thank you.
I'm Susan Slavin, Chief Branch of for Department of Social Services. I manage the infrastructure as well as the help desk, desktop, telecommunications department, and we provide, Department of Social Services provides service and opportunities to the U.S. citizens of California.
Thank you. So my name is Srinivas. It's my second time in this panel. So I'm the CTO of CANES and also a senior research scientist with New Mexico Tech. I mean, a lot of people might not know who we are. When you talk about seismic in California, everything is mapped back to Socorro, New Mexico. We actually do that for the entire world today. It's one of the largest ever funded projects in the United States. It's a $250 million project where we study seismic activity across the globe. So we're the guys who actually are helping, warning Californians, hey, this is going on. That was already told. That was already told. Actually, so it's an interesting project. So exactly. So
call Gigi and me.
we will. So that's an interesting project. So because I mean data science, right? You're talking about data science. This project has been going on for 14 years. The tsunami in Japan, they indicated that 6 months well in advance, but people ignored that. So that's an interesting thing. So I mean, those are some of the interesting things we study on the science side, and then how do we take that into cybersecurity, and that's what we have done in CANES today. Really taking some real hard, challenging problems where we applied computational intelligence. That's what Mark was talking about. But the problem is we can't go around and say we're computational intelligence, so we're changing our name to cybersecurity works. So people would catch, okay, you do cybersecurity now, not computational intelligence. So that's really who I am, and then excited to see you all. And then hopefully I can add some value to the conversation. Early warning, right? We forgot the last month, but this time we will give you well in advance.
All right, good morning. Bill Otterbeck, Assistant Deputy Director, Department of Healthcare Services. I work in the California Medicaid Management Information System Division. I will be bringing a strong business focus. If Barney is the CTO, I'm more akin to the COO, the Chief Operations Officer. In my role, I am responsible as the contract officer for the Xerox fiscal intermediary contract, so a $1.7 billion contract. And I'm also the Assistant Project Director reporting to my boss, Vicky Sadie. So I'm thrilled to be here. I won't be your technical expert, but I'm going to give you a strong business perspective on the issues that we're going to discuss today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Wayne Babby. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Research for Department of Corrections. And I know you're wondering, how did a research guy get on this panel? I think I previously worked on the IT side. I rolled out, helped manage the rollout of our strategic offender management system within the Department of Corrections. Also worked on CSAS back, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. So I've have about 17 years of IT experience. So the ironic thing is being on the research side and having to work with big data, I literally have to live in the house that I helped build. And so we're going through a lot of the growing pains that a lot of departments are, so I'm really excited that we're having these discussions around big data because I think a lot of us are going through that maturation process. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Reeson. I'm the CIO at California State Lottery, and I've been that for 3 days. Prior to that, I was at CalPERS and CalSTRS. I spent about 15 years doing pension work in IT, project management, et cetera, et cetera. And more recently, I spent the last 3 years putting in place a business intelligence program at CalPERS and learning a whole lot more about data and dealing with it. Lottery as well, very product-driven, very data-driven. And so there's a lot going on over at Lottery in terms of making use of data in probably ways that are a bit different than a lot of the other government departments and such because we are product-driven, we're selling. It's a marketing and sales organization. So happy to be here. Hopefully good panel discussion going on today.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to go ahead and get started with some interview questions. And as I said, this portion of it, I have some questions for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to you, the audience. My first question is for Dave Grade with Integra. Dave, right now, California Assembly Bill 2408 requires consolidation of data centers and telecommunication services under OTEC. It's also intended to streamline IT infrastructure and procurement. For many agency users, this is an internal form of big data repository. Can you share with us what you've learned from other states and the practice of consolidation as it relates to best practices, successes, and pitfalls? Dave?
California is not alone in this effort, although I think when you're looking at a state that by some measures can be ranked one of the top 10 economies in the world if it were its own nation state, it may be a little bit of a different challenge than some of the neighbors. But you look at a Utah or a Washington or an Oregon, or yesterday an RFP came out in Arizona, all chasing the same thing. You know, how do we reduce costs, put more accessibility to our citizens, and allow access to the data. And there's some great lessons to be learned, particularly the folks that are managing some of those Medicaid data sets. Interesting scenario in Utah 2 years ago when the data set was lifted by some operatives from an Eastern Bloc country in Europe. And they participated with one of the healthcare exchanges in the state, so one of our great hospital systems similar to Kaiser. Ran everybody through the system regardless of whether they were Medicaid or not. So all of a sudden you had hundreds of thousands of identities stolen. And then when they started looking at the root causes of those things, the virtual machines that data was hosted on also had motor vehicle database information and other things. And all of a sudden it sweeps across the whole IT infrastructure across multiple agencies in the state. And those are some things to think about, is there are some great efficiencies to be had from an operational rack space and power perspective. But what about virtualization? What about the software? What about the layers of control inside our organizations? And then when the crisis hits, how does this get resolved? You know, it's not me, it was them, it's not them, it was, because at the end of the day, it's us as the professionals supplying the services. So it's an interesting topic, but I would invite some real study to be done, probably from my perspective, managing infrastructure for many states in the West as an organization. Utah's probably got one of the better policies and procedures and methods in place, forced upon them, primarily because they have a big federal repository that just moved in that required the heat signature of their whole activity. I mean, they're ground zero now for foreign operatives to come and try to see if they can sneaker net something into the great building that the government has put in Utah, the federal government, a repository of data. And so they would be a great example. And interestingly, we see some really interesting things in Washington as well. So I would invite you to maybe take a look at that and focus on, it's not just consolidating rack space and power, but you've got to look at metadata definitions and virtualization components and all those architectural decisions. And they've put some policy boards through teaming arrangements across departments, and it's really kind of neat. So that's how I would respond to that maybe.
I have one other question for you too. And Dave, I agree with what you're saying. We're seeing organizations like NASPO, WISCA do these purchasing agreements for all states, so it's a way to buy things effectively without spending a lot of time in procurement, and we're seeing a lot of that resonate out of Utah. Dave, my second question for you is, from a carrier's perspective of trends in transport in the age of, can you share a little bit what you're seeing? You all are a carrier. What are you seeing as that relates to big data and security?
Ethernet's kind of the name of the game nowadays. I imagine Wi-Fi is also kind of the access methods. I look at my own home, couple children's at home, and one day I was trying to count the number of active network devices. You know, I'm one of those guys, I get down and I pull up the MAC table on the router to see what, I was shocked. I said, how can all these things be in the, you know, it's a world of information out there, and I think as we've had, our citizenry is much more connected now than a lot of the agencies. You know, I've been working on some issues where we still have a lot of SNA and token ring traffic in some states, and in this state I'm sure there's a lot of that, right? Well, that stuff doesn't really behave very well, you know, tunneled across the internet anymore, or even tunneled across our IP Ethernet infrastructure. But we don't have those kind of technologies in our home anymore. We don't have those technologies in most large business. They've already made the migrations. And so we've got some of those movements that need to occur. But I really think Ethernet is where we're seeing industry going, and larger pipes. It is not uncommon multiple times a week where our company is turning up 100 gigabit express waves across town or between city states simply for multi-master database replication. These are private circuits for enterprise and for some of our state customers. But I think if you're not familiar with Ethernet, the Metro Ethernet Forum, and making that move in your organization as far as a transport perspective, that needs to be something that's top of the line. And then the last piece probably is the CISO office. If it exists, great. If it doesn't, it needs to, because that'll give all of you guys the plausible deniability that you need when the opportunity, because it's not a matter of if you will be attacked, it's a matter of when. And an organization in Utah had about 300,000 latent drive-bys a day until the Medicaid breach occurred. This was a public company. That signature in attending the InfraGuard meetings went from 300,000 a day to almost 6 million a day, the day after the thing hit the news, because now they were ground zero. You look at the repositories of data that we hold here as stewards of that, that's very valuable on various markets of the planet. And if you don't have a CISO, you need to have a CISO, and it needs to be an active participant in all of your architecture discussions, all of your infrastructure discussions, and then the sharing of data across entities. That metadata definition and how you work through all that, those are things that really need to be addressed when we talk about big data. That's from a carrier's perspective.
Thank you, Dave. Next questions are for Barney Gomez. Barney, big data is a buzzword right now with a lot of momentum. Can you share with us how big data has affected your IT infrastructure as it relates to security?
A lot of money. So, I mean, from our perspective, you know, from an IT infrastructure point of view, we have to basically ensure that we have the right pieces of technology in place. So what that means for us is that we're pursuing different types of flash array systems where they're using solid state drives to basically push that kind of data, large amounts of data, you know, in and out for our customers to basically serve up the information that's needed for our customers. one of the biggest initiatives that we're pursuing within the Department of Healthcare Services is we have a large footprint with our data analytics platform. So we have multiple disparate systems throughout our department, and what we're trying to do from an IT point of view is consolidate that to an enterprise solution. And I can honestly say we are on a direct path to basically consolidate this environment into an enterprise environment, thus putting in an infrastructure that's going to be able to support it. So really what it means for us is basically putting the right kind of technologies in place, like flash arrays with solid state drives that are going to serve up that kind of technology for us. Having the right type of security in place, in terms of encryption, whether it's at rest or in transit, because I think it's important for us to realize that, as from a big data point of view, data at rest, data in transit, it does require that kind of encryption to be in place, because, as Dave is referring to Ethernet, there are times it depends on how that you're architected, you are subject to those vulnerabilities. So having that kind of encryption in place as it relates to your big data environment, it's important to ensure that the encryption and the security is in place, the technology is in place that are going to serve up the data that you need. That metadata, as Dave has referred to, is important as well too, because with those kind of signatures in place, you can become very, very vulnerable. So that's one of our biggest efforts, and from a big data point of view, what we're trying to do is establish it in an environment that we can basically begin to use this from a shared services point of view. Big data is about having that information available around, and within our agency, the healthcare services is one of many departments within the California Health and Human Services Agency. So there's a lot of talk within our agency, within the various departments, of how we can basically accomplish, data and sharing data and the big data concept. So with what we got underway with one of our efforts, relative to the SaaS effort, we are definitely trying to put something into place that we can serve it up and have the right technologies and the securities in place to basically support all our constituents and our stakeholders.
Thanks, Barney. And that actually leads me to my second question for you. As the state moves to cloud services, security challenges frankly become more difficult, especially in multi-tenant service infrastructure. Some departments require a higher level of security than other departments and may be mandated to meet federal or state laws or risk with heavy penalties. How do you ensure that everything is designed properly, since a single flaw in one client's application could allow an attacker to get at not just that client's data, but everyone else's data, just like Dave was mentioning?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll start by saying that the initiative with what Caltech is doing, their CalCloud services, I think it's with Director Ramos and what their environment is doing, I think it's a great start for the state of California to basically put something like that in place. I can say that in working with them, we are Healthcare Services is actually in an effort right now with them to actually perform an assessment with what our environment exists out there in what they call the COMS environment, the Customer-Owned Equipment Managed Environment. So to ensure that we have the right kind of securities in place, we've been talking with Caltech. And for healthcare services, because we are a HIPAA department and we are mandated by HIPAA standards and laws, we have to ensure that both privacy and security practices are in place. As such, we have to meet these kind of solutions like this have to meet FedRAMP standards, NIST standards. So part of our goal is to basically ensure that these standards are in place prior to us even thinking about going towards that direction. We also, we're a firm believer as well too. We do have a CISO in place. So so I do have plausible deniability. So in the event, so I'm just saying right now that. Now we got you on the road. Well, I'm just saying. So. Well, what we are doing is, we have to. I think part of what we do is we ensure that we have the right architecture in place, we have the right policies in place, that they meet these kind of standards from a HIPAA point of view, the privacy and standards. We do penetration tests. We have a lot of tools in place to ensure that we can perform penetration tests. I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, and as we move forward, I think the CalCloud solution is going to be important for us. The other effort that we always try to make sure is, as it relates to the question is, when other vendors are in place or other departments are in place and there is a cloud solution, as it relates to security, I think, you got to have things like host-based intrusion in place. You got to have things that are in place that are going to determine vectors that are on the Ethernet pipe. So it's really important to have all those kind of policies, standards, the architecture in place to ensure that you have a good environment to basically move towards some sort of cloud service provider solution.
Thank you, Barney. Chris, in your previous role at CalPERS, can you give us an understanding of how CalPERS is utilizing data to support audit, fraud, and security-related activities?
Sure. So if you're not aware, CalPERS provides services to over 3,000 different employers. People working for state government or the state, counties, schools, et cetera. And one of the things that we worked on over the last couple of years was to look or change the way that audits were performed on all of these various employers. Previous to the work that we started doing, it was almost a round-robin approach. And given the number of auditors and given the number of employers, it could be a 20-year span between audits. And so the auditors at CalPERS wanted to make a change in terms of how they were assessing who needed to be audited. And so they wanted to take a risk-based approach. And so for over the course of, say, the last year or so, we started doing exploration in terms of what data made sense to look at in order to assess risk of the employers. What would help us to determine which employer presented a greater risk to the organization in terms of their contributions that they would submit to us or the data that they provided to us. And so we learned a lot about what it is that we would take in. And then going forward, the intent is to actually put in place dashboards so that CalPERS auditors can better understand on a regular basis and reassess on a regular basis which employers present the highest risk, adjust their plans accordingly, and go out and it may mean that certain employers might be visited not so often, but it also means that the highest risk employers will be looked at on a regular basis and ensure that the integrity of the system is improved.
Thank you, Chris. Last question for you. With your new role as CIO over at the Cal Auto, how do you see the use of data impacting future projects and operations?
So, in the course of the whirlwind of 2 days, like I mentioned earlier, lottery is a bit different than what I was used to and also what I think we've been used to kind of from a normal perspective within government. And one, I would say, positive indication of that was when I realized that more than 50% of the organization is geared towards sales and marketing. It made me realize it's a very product-driven organization and that the use of data there is something that helps the lottery in its mission of putting money into education. And the way that it does that is obviously to increase profits. And so the model there is quite different from what I'm used to, but it's obvious that data is something that from a lottery perspective is very much about how do we know that products are selling like we would expect? How do we know that the right mix of games is available to players and it's available in terms of what they want to be able to play? How do we know that we're getting the return on, say, a marketing promotion that we would expect and that it's having the effect that we would expect? And so lottery is in a mode of collecting as much information as possible and putting it through and putting it into the hands of the various sales representatives that are out there, putting it into the hands of marketing so that they can determine whether or not, say, the 20 or 30 scratchers that are available in a particular retailer are actually the right mix of games and that they're all selling well as opposed to some that might just be sitting there latent. And so data at lottery and the use of it is key in all of the projects. I had a number of meetings over the last couple of days where there were laundry lists of the projects going on, And in almost every one of those meetings and the topic of discussion around those projects was the business intelligence and business analytics program, and how are we feeding more data into it, and how is it tied into, say, the new products that are being developed, and how are we making sure that the data that's coming in is tied into it. And so it's very much that marketing and sales side, and the whole organization kind of operates around that, and data is very key in that.
Thank you, Chris. Gigi, can you share with us how big data can be used to create innovation and reduce cost?
Thank you. One of the things that we're doing at CalTRANS is trying to figure out how can we do more with less, much like many organizations here. CalTRANS is funded primarily through fuel tax. With so many vehicles becoming much more fuel efficient with the hybrids, our fuel tax are going low, are reducing. And so we still need to provide services to Californians by maintaining the highways that you all use on a regular basis. So then the question is, how can IT support the business in being more efficient and effective? We've been working with some of the big firms like Nokia, for example, and doing some road studies to determine, at what point should roads be maintained, taking a look at road conditions, seeing, how long it takes folks to brake on certain roads, at highways that have a pretty strong turn, what's the issue or the risks associated with accidents. So we're using a lot of data that's coming from cell phones, because a lot of people are using their cell phones, and so we can determine how quickly people are driving down the freeways, and that information can be used to improve traffic safety. That's just one example. But from another perspective, we're looking at even our administrative costs. How can we reduce some of our administrative costs as it relates to employee retention, as it relates to our workers' compensation cases. And so at CalTRANS, supporting over 20,000 employees, you can imagine we have quite a bit of data that can be used to perform the requisite analysis to determine how to put some programs in place and some strategies in place to, reduce some of those costs. So those are just a couple of examples that we're doing to use big data to become more innovative.
Gigi, I have one other question for you. Could you share with the audience what analytical infrastructure and resources would be necessary to support a big data program?
That's really one of my passions. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's critical that we have and we outfit our resources with the knowledge, the skills, and abilities to really support a big data program. So, for example, we have a research organization like many state departments and private sector organizations, but analyzing big data is a little different. Actually, it's a lot different than just the routine data sets. And so what we need to do is really outfit our staff with an understanding of the data, what that data really means, so that they can take that raw data and make some meaning out of it. And to me, that is critical. It's also important that we be mindful of the amount of data that we're capturing. We don't want to capture too much data that it becomes meaningless or that it becomes a liability. Oftentimes, organizations capture data, they don't use that data, but then it turns out that it could be used against the organization later. So in situations like that, you need to make a concerted effort to determine the level and extent of data that you want to maintain. And really, that should involve executive management and setting some policy, making some policy decisions in terms of what that looks like.
Thank you, Gigi. And we're going to shift over to Brenda, but really as a follow-on to something Gigi was saying. Brenda, as it relates to information as an asset, how can we use the wealth of data we have right now to engage and benefit the citizen?
Sit up here. And you all know that information is vast. And so like, you know, we at the Board of Equalization, like most organizations, have just tons and tons and tons of data. And it's evolved over the years. With 30-plus tax programs and being around for quite some time, you can imagine the volumes of data that we have, falling into three categories. We've got property tax information, we've got sales and use tax information, and we have special taxes for things like alcohol, beverages. You'd be surprised at the range of the, being new, fairly new still to the board. I'm just amazed at how many tax programs and the tax practices and policies and the PhD people that know all about this tax stuff. So I think for us, you know, like I said, most of us have data. We've all had a lot of experience, you know, working with data and working with that information from, you know, reports, right? And I was thinking about it earlier, and I thought if we all took a look over the history of our careers or our lives and thought about all the reports that we've seen and all the data that's in the reports, and if we had $1 for every piece of that, we could do a lot, right, you think? So, but I think what's happening from an information perspective, and this is just, you know, one perspective, and that is, you know, data is really maturing as a result of advanced technologies and the consumers just needing more of that. I think we are maturing into more of an information state. And so for us, we're always looking for, you know, what really is that difference between data and information, and what, and it sounds like a name change, but it's more than that. There's a lot of other value and principles and practices and thinking and a paradigm shift that occurs with that. So then when it becomes an asset, I mean, you think about all the other assets in your portfolio, you want to protect it like anything else because it is a valued resource to help you to be successful. You think about private industry and the competitive advantages, et cetera. So you want to use it in a way that it's going to benefit your whoever your organizations are, your customer groups. And so at the board, we take advantage of the vast amounts of information and try to make it more easily available so that we could save our businesses, and we have, you know, over 1,000 businesses registered with the board. And so they're running businesses on a regular basis. Our goal is to try to give them quick and easy, convenient access to that information, so it saves them time. Because every minute or hour or however much time they stay away from running their businesses and generating, you know, whatever that revenue is, because they're massaging some portions of our work or our activities, they're not focusing on their business. So we want to get them back to doing their businesses as quickly as they possibly can. So when they have to interact with us, and they do, if you're a business in California, you have to interact with us, we want to make it convenient and easy and just get you back to what your primary goals and objectives are. We use data and information in a lot of different ways, you know, from our board members who, you know, are elected officials, and they have a responsibility to stay in contact with their constituents, and there's a lot of information that's of value to them, and they turn that information around not just for their own benefit, but they look for ways and patterns to help those citizens. We're doing some cool things with our open data portal, where we're taking a lot of the information that we've had, you know, in our space for quite some time, a lot of historic data, and just, you know, how most of us have data that's buried someplace in a website or someplace, and basically pushing that information forward so that it's up front and it's aggregated, you know, non-confidential data, aggregated into a portal so people can get to it a lot easier. We're finding some benefits from it because not only is it benefit to the external businesses that we work with, but government agencies, policymakers, you know, et cetera, those people who typically would contact us and ask us to pull the data now can self-serve that data. But it's also a great benefit having easy access to that information as an asset as our internal auditors and collectors. They can grab that information a lot faster. So we're finding a number of ways of just really thinking about data in different ways and adding the value a lot of times in how it's presented, how it's made more convenient, and then trying to look for different patterns and different ways to aggregate it so that that value of the data and that information is increased.
Last question for you. Could you comment on how different departments can share big data partnerships?
Well, yeah, that's my baby, and I'm excited about that one. How much time do you guys have? So, I'm sitting next to one of my partners, as revenue agencies and tax administration agencies. We talk a lot and have a lot of fun together, but we do share a lot of information. We just last year had a measure that was passed, AB 576, which is a bill that is addressing the underground economy. And so we're very excited because what that bill does is it allows us to, by statute, have partner agencies that come together, FTB, BOE, EDD, Department of Justice in this first group, and then there's some other agencies that also support it. But we're getting an opportunity now to come together, share that data across those departments as it relates to businesses where there's fraud or criminal activity, where somebody's underreporting or somebody's doing some counterfeiting. There's a lot of activity that's going on in the underground economy space. So, and there's estimates on what that underground economy gap is and the tax gap on that. If we could recover by working together, and we could do a number of different activities to try to recover some of that revenue from that underground economy, it would be huge. If you think about what's going on in a lot of the criminal space, you think about handbags, DVDs. I had an opportunity to work with the Motion Picture Association, and they just kind of walked me through a scenario. So if I may, you've all got, at some point, not so much anymore, but now we're more on demand, but there was a season when everybody had DVDs. Somebody goes into a theater and they're doing, recording the DVDs, and they're going to sell that. See people selling it at flea markets and barbershops, etc. Talking to the Motion Picture Association, what we learned from that is for every one of those that's sold, there's a whole series of industries that are directly impacted by the loss of that revenue. Because if you're not selling it through the normal, authorized, legitimate channels, it goes down to caterers who are not getting their money, the people who do dry cleaning. So you have all of these support organizations who support that model all the way from top to bottom. So every one of those is having a revenue hit and a revenue impact. And so it's impactful. And so what we're having an opportunity to do now is to work together with these great other partner agencies, coming together with our investigators, to sit down and say, let's look for the patterns of data. By sharing it, if we look at data in an industry, restaurants, for example, and we look and see what kind of, maybe underreporting or criminal activity might be occurring there, where somebody's not reporting their employees, the correct number of employees, the correct number of sales, all those kind of things. It gives those investigators a clearer picture, because it's like Rubik's Cube. You've got multiple dimensions to it, and if you can look at it in a number of different ways, you get a more robust view of the landscape. And by working together and moving forward on some of those investigations, the amount of revenue and the quality of the leads and the amount of revenue is significantly increased. So we're excited about it. It's still relatively new, and so coming soon, my staff will probably kill me for that, coming soon will be the webpage for kind of the acronyms for AB 576 are what we call TRACE, T-R-A-C-E, and the second one is RACE, which is R-R-A-C-E, basically standing for tax recovery and criminal enforcement, and the second is the revenue recovery and criminal enforcement. So you'll see our webpage coming soon with a lot of additional services that engages the citizens and the public. So if you see some criminal activity, you can go online and then begin to access that. So we're using, like I say, we're talking before about the information as an asset. We're using that information and asset and the shared data and the big data models, data analytics, BI. It's all just, the stars are all lining up. So good opportunities for all.
Thanks, Brenda. I want to transition, and one of the things I know about California Highway Patrol, besides all the wonderful public services that they provide us citizens of California, is that you all leverage a lot of partnerships with other agencies and share with them some of the technological innovations that you make, and then they're able to implement those in their organization. Could you talk to us a little bit about what you all have been doing there?
Absolutely. It's interesting when you talk about partnerships and leveraging data, because when you look at the ability to share and work together to accomplish major projects, a lot of times there's huge cost savings that can happen. One of the projects that we did, we actually completed an upgrade of all our computer-aided dispatch centers back in July of 2012. And that included rolling out a new dispatch system to our 25 centers. Immediately following that, the Department of Parks and Recreation was trying to do the same thing, and they were looking for proposals and everything else. And we ended up leveraging our system, and rather than them reinventing the wheel, we took our system and expanded it to them. And so Parks and Rec is just in addition to our CAD system, they also dispatch for Fish and Wildlife. Ultimately, they were able to roll out their system much quicker. They used the lessons learned from us rolling it into 25 dispatch centers. And of course, if you compared our first dispatch center to their last one, it went a whole lot smoother with their last one because they benefited from all our lessons learned with change management and everything, and training and everything else that goes along with that. But it's amazing when you looked at the numbers, though, they had a 70% savings in their project based on leveraging our computer-aided dispatch center. The other benefit is we can share information electronically CAD to CAD. And so if we receive a call that needs to go to parks, a mobile 911 call of an emergency in a state park where a state park ranger is going to respond, we can electronically send the entire CAD record, all the information that we've obtained, to them electronically, seamlessly, and they have it instantaneously. So it's amazing what you can do when you leverage systems together.
Next question is kind of a two-parter, but I'd like you to share with the audience how CHP uses data, as you mentioned, with computer-aided dispatch and what that does for us as citizens. And if you could also highlight in that, what challenges does mobile data provide to you all?
It's interesting when you think of the vast amounts of data. We receive about 600,000 911 calls a month in our 25 dispatch centers. And so we have a ton of data. And it's interesting, before I joined the CHP 24 years ago, I was actually in television news. And one of the things that I would do on the assignment desk is I would call the CHP. Do you have any incidents working? To try and figure out if there were any major incidents, the highway patrol is working, major collisions, roadway blockages, and those types of things to put on the television news. The other day, I'm driving down Highway 50 listening to the CHP radio, and you hear a crash come out. I also had my FM radio on, and they gave a traffic report. Within seconds, the crash that just came out on my radio was on the traffic report. And so it's interesting, Barney, I know you wanted us to stretch earlier, so I'm sure before you went to yoga this morning, you probably checked your traffic report. But when you look at it, whether it's the television news, our CHP officer giving the updates, whether it's a news anchor giving the updates, whether it's talk radio giving the updates, whether you're checking your news app on your smartphone, all that data comes directly from our computer-aided dispatch center. And you're able to check your route prior to going to find out, do I need to adjust how I get to yoga? Or do I need to maybe do yoga after work, or maybe do it with a group when we get to the panel? But it struck me as we were getting ready for this how important that data is, where if you just thought internally, what do we use the data for? Try and look at highway safety, where are collisions happening, where do we need to deploy resources? But from the public standpoint, it helps you because if you know Highway 50 is closed, you're not going to go sit in traffic and wonder for hours why it's not moving. You're going to find an alternate route. Hopefully you check before you leave as opposed to getting stuck and then not having an exit to get off because it's a gridlock. But I think at the same time, data is also a huge challenge for us. Everybody's got a smartphone. Anybody driven lately, you just look over to the car next to you and everybody wants to check the latest data right now while I'm driving. You didn't think the chief of the CHP would be here and not talk about safety, did you? and I think it's amazing. I was talking to one of the panelists earlier. As you look at all the improvements in vehicles, airbags, automated warning devices, automatic braking, all those great safety devices that come, and yet what is additional mobility of data doing to the drivers? We're watching our phones rather than the road. And 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to crash, but the one time that you need to be watching the road rather than your phone, and you don't see the car in front of you stop or the child or anything else, it's too late. And our real challenge is really trying to keep that mobile data out of the driver's eyes so they can watch the road out there. And I think it's also interesting when you look at the data says, hey, you got to wear your seatbelt. The data says you can't drink and drive. The data tells us that you need to slow down. I did work in the data to my safety message, just so you know. But it's amazing on how you can use that. And it's also amazing when you look at the bigger, more global data of how that helps us as deploying our personnel. Of where do we have collision issues that we need to increase enforcement? It's sharing that data. We receive about 390,000 traffic collision reports a year from 500 allied agencies across the state. And we take that data and we enter it into our database, but we also share that data with CalTRANS, so that CalTRANS can also look at that to see trends in collisions, to find out are there engineering fixes, safety improvements that we can make to reduce the number of collisions. We look at it as a deployment. Where do we need people? All to really utilize that data to benefit the public and improve safety.
Thank you, Scott. Next question is for Stacey. Stacey, you come from the private industry to the state of California. As you get ready to start your new job with Gigi at CalTRANS, what are you really looking for from the vendor community as it relates to technology?
Thank you, Jim. Really from the vendor community, Gigi and I have had several conversations about this, is we want to look towards progressive companies. Where is private industry going? Where are they? We do a lot of video and things like that. What is Netflix doing with video? I mean, what are we're very close to Silicon Valley. What are some of the companies they're doing to be able to progress and to be cost effective, be agile, improve our maintainability? What is private industry doing? They're typically, we don't want to be bleeding edge, but we want to head down that road of efficiency, maintainability, looking at it from an enterprise perspective, and rather than just only looking internal to public sector, what are the dot-coms doing? So that's really where we want to focus, so that we can gain, learn from their experiences, similar to, CHP was talking about leveraging information back and forth. What can we do that with the private sector as well? What can we glean from them?
Next question for you is a two-part question. When you were at Covered California, I'd like you to share with the audience, how did going to a VoIP solution provide you an improvement in your functionality and cost savings? And then I'd like to transition with your new role at CalTRANS. What kind of improvements and savings are you looking for?
Well, at Covered California, interesting, we moved our headquarters as well as moved our data center over to OTEC. And one of the things that we were looking at is Covered California has to be sustainable by 2015. And how are we going to do that? We took and moved to basically unified communications, i.e. VoIP system there. And the ROI on that ended up being 3 months. So we, after 3 months, you could throw it in the garbage and start new, and it would be good to go. Part two of that was looking at the Ethernet connections, as Dave was talking about earlier, and then putting in the MPLS connections. And we did a huge decrease in our costs. It was, over 30% right off the bat. And not only that, it was a seamless fiber connection between OTEC and Covered California headquarters, and it just decreased our costs significantly, as well as increased performance. Now, instead of the circle of death that our users had been experiencing before, they were very quick to get their data, quick to turn. Marketing is a big thing for Covered California as well. How do you get the insurance message out, and getting that communication set up in a quick manner. And having those two pieces tied together and integrated decreased costs for sustainability, and then also increased performance, as well as security on that. So the security of the data lines, going fiber with the Ethernet, and then it's a self-healing ring here in Sacramento between Covered California and OTEC. And so really from a redundancy perspective, there was only one little spur going from the street to the building, and I think we'd notice if someone was trenching that up. But very, very successful in that perspective. Now, part two, as for CalTRANS, we're looking at different things, looking at EA agreements, looking at different cost efficiencies. We've got a large network throughout California. How do we go through and from an enterprise perspective, and get our cost efficiencies out of that, out of the network, increase performance for less cost. And so it's not only just working within ourselves and the agencies, but also with the vendor community to look at that. So it's really from a broad spectrum.
Thank you for that. My next question is for Srinivas. Could you share with us, with all your experience in enterprise security, what is the most significant threat that people need to be aware of?
Data.
Good answer. I got another question if you're ready.
I mean, I'll say that, right? I mean, if you look at what Barney just talked about and then what Brenda talked about, we need a warning one day earlier. That's good enough, right? I mean, that's a very positive thing. But if you take a look at what's going on today, you know, this year we can start with Target, right? That's a good Christmas gift for everybody, right? And we started there. I mean, if you do high-end shopping, you went to Neiman Marcus. And if you did a little more better, you went to the healthcare, pretty much, and then you started with Home Depot. Now, if you look at the spectrum, they're coming from a traditional day-to-day grocery to your home building. So they're not leaving any stone unturned, from your healthcare provider to your retailer to your lingerie. I mean, they're trying to compromise everywhere and everywhere you use your credit card. To me, that's data, right? So the biggest problem I see as enterprises, us not understanding our data inputs. If you look at Target, that's your HVACs. Why in the world you would expect your contractor not to be careful with his credentials? And once those credentials are misused, you do a stepping stone, you come into your network, and then start compromising your domain credentials, and then become a domain administrator. Your data didn't work there either because you have sensors there. They didn't catch that. And then they would set up an FTP server to stage the data before they would exfiltrate it. All this thing happened for 3 months, not one day. And there were enough warnings, right? If you go back and take a look at it, we said this, we said this, we said this, but did you act on it? No, you did not. That caused that thing. And if you go back any traditional breach today, it's not you did not have alarms. You are overwhelmed with alarms, so you ignored every single thing. And that's really what's going on today. I mean, so that's where the classic big data comes into play. And then I really liked, you know, when Barney was talking about we have lots of data, but when Dave was talking about Ethernet, both of them kind of talked between lines. They said encryption. Encryption is very expensive. And it's not easy to do encryption on big data. And that's where you start doing about something like client identifiers. Can we encrypt certain fields and leave the metadata alone so you can do all your business analytics? And I believe that's where the field is trying to mature. What is to be encrypted? What is not to be encrypted? Where do I do my analytics? How much to open up? And with cybersecurity, that's even much more challenging because, and Barney talked about something very interesting. As we move to the cloud, we still do not want to forget host-based intrusion detection. That's extremely important. A lot of people forget that it's a two-way thing. An attacker can be at your central source or at your endpoint as well. And now think about this problem, turn it around, and Dave talked about he has 15 router entries on his MAC table. Take your home as an example. In our home, we have 14 sensors that actually communicate today, from our home alarm, from our new Samsung refrigerator, from our Roku box. The first thing we did was we just moved into a new home last month. I went and disabled every single connectivity because I couldn't reset the passwords. And Samsung said, there's no way we can do it. You just have to use the password we gave you. I'm like, okay, then I don't want to use the sensor. Then just disable it. So this tells you something interesting. Now, can somebody come into my refrigerator? I don't know. If they come in, I know for sure they can get into my home router. Then game is over, right? They can implant anything they want. And if I do my client work, they can start looking at my client work. These are some very simple things. And when you take a look at enterprises, here I see a lot of your CIOs. Everyone has 20,000 people to support. And each one has about, on an average, 3 devices. You're talking 60,000 known endpoints. Now imagine what else is in your data centers, what else is in your buildings. This building alone will have probably 100 sensors for building management services, for temperature controls and all that stuff. Now, any one of them can be an attack vector. That's why I said data is a problem. You have data to do good things. You have great opportunities like marketing, analytics, citizen services. For bad things, I need one entry point to any of these data points to gain what I want to gain. And that's exactly what's going on today.
What advice would you give for a chief information security officer? What is the first thing you think they should do besides disable the refrigerator?
No, I'll go back to Barney's thing. Don't be a casualty of a CIO. So that's an interesting problem, right? So organizations who are mature enough have CISOs. Organizations who don't think about it don't have CISOs. And that's where there is a cultural disagreement, if you would say. I mean, because we work in several states. I come from my background is a PhD in computer science. And the fortune of what I've done, I see several states. I've talked to several CISOs. We work in about 9 states today. I mean, there's a big cultural difference from what a traditional CIO/CISO should be versus what a true CISO should be, right? Should I be a technologist? Should I be a policy enforcer? They're really 2 different roles. And in the way the technology is evolving, a policy person might not be the right fit for today's CISO's role. And we see that over and over again. The reason we see that is the data is a problem again, right? There's so much data science. And if you're a pure policy person, you might not appreciate the big data. You might not appreciate the analytics. Because here now suddenly you're talking big spending, big understanding of data. So the cultural fit, the role is evolving, right? If you take a look at large Fortune 100 companies now, they have a chief data security officer and they have a chief information security officer. The role is already getting split. Okay, I am the data security officer, you are the policy enforcer. So one thing is buy unlimited insurance. If somebody is willing to underwrite your insurance, that's becoming a big thing too. How do I even approach cyber insurance and get an underwriting policy? So, I mean, to be really honest, what advice I would give to the CISOs? Understand your data inputs. What are your partners? How much are you exposing to them? At the same thing, what's leaving your network? If you understand what's coming and what's leaving your network, 95% of the problems are solved today. And that's where the refrigerator thing comes into play. Now, I know that that can be a conduit to collect the data, leave the data. If I disable it, one problem less to worry about. So the CISO first job should be data classification, and that's the first thing in HIPAA. It's really classify HIPAA-related data, and then every industry has their own requirements.
Thank you. Next question is for Bill. Given that healthcare services in both the private and public sectors are going through significant changes, how are you all adapting your customer service delivery strategies to address changing consumer expectations of what a good customer experience is?
Thank you for the question. At Healthcare Services, we are embarking on 2 major implementations. One is Health Enterprise, which will be the replacement of our 30-year-old mainframe system for fee-for-service claims processing. So we're a high-volume shop. We're processing about $330 million in claims every single week. That's about 4 million claims. We have approximately 100,000 calls to our call center. So high volume, we're dealing with 125,000 providers. We're also going to be implementing a new provider enrollment portal. And so as we talked about the planning for these implementations, I think the epiphany for us is we paused and we asked ourselves the question, well, how does this impact our customers, not just from a transition or implementation perspective, but how does it present an opportunity to change the customer engagement and customer experience that folks are having with our program through our systems? And the answer that we reached was unequivocally yes, it is going to change the experience. So do we want to meld that to meet customer expectations, understanding industry trends, or do we just want to do an out-of-the-box implementation? And I think what we've looked at is, so how do we become more mobile-enabled using our new technology, so using HTML5? How do we integrate into the application certain customer experience features like live chat, video training, that can better support our customers? Generally, when customers are reaching out to us, they have a problem that they need to get fixed. A fairly small percentage of our customer contact is purely informational. Usually they have a problem they want to fix. We know that people want to self-serve rather than call our call center. So we want to build into the application as many self-service capabilities as possible. One of the exciting things for us is in implementing our provider enrollment solution, we've built in with our partner a set of gamification strategies to make the customer experience in enrolling in Medi-Cal, believe it or not, more interesting, more engaging, and maybe on the margin a little bit more pleasurable than having 70 pages of paper applications that you'd have to submit today. So all of that is an opportunity to reset how we are working with our customers. And one of the strengths that we have in the Medi-Cal program is partnerships that we have with statewide associations, so that we're going to have a good mechanism and ability to reach out and have a conversation about what provider expectations are as we finish the design of the system and prepare for implementation.
Got one other question for you. You know, in this whole era of big data, we all tend to focus on our devices and the security of it, but one of the things we tend to overlook is the call center. So I'd like to ask you, Bill, what is your perspective on the call center and the relative value they provide given the increasing utilization of other customer service channels?
Great, thank you. I was looking at some industry data recently, and the statistics that I saw were that in the 90s, you know, 90% of customer contact was happening at, you know, your traditional call center. And today it's more like 30%, right? So how are people getting their information? How are they getting their services? And quite frankly, do you just downsize your call center, or do you figure out how to use that technical experience and those highly knowledgeable resources, because they've built a reservoir of knowledge over time? How do you use them through other customer service channels? And one of the things that we've looked at in looking at our call center is this whole question of, if we're going to implement live chat or video chat, how do we leverage those call center resources at the right time for the right kind of question? You know, Kathy Kleek and I were chatting prior to the panel. We know that if folks self-serve on the web, it's a lot less expensive than using your call center resources. But there is an opportunity to leverage the expertise that you have in your call center via other customer service channels, including live chat. You know, the one sort of thing that we're going to have to contend with is that customers want to be have peer-to-peer experiences, use social media, and we haven't solved that puzzle yet. How do we make that best work in our environment, understanding that our primary customer is providers? So that's one of the challenges we'll have to figure out, and can the call center resources be a part of that solution?
Thank you. Kathy, could you share with us what is the most beneficial enhancement you've made to your telecom system?
This time I'll start with the microphone on. So the thing that we've done recently, how many of you have called the call center and gotten put on hold? Yeah, and I think that's pretty universal, that, you know, you do call centers, and they may not be as busy as they were a few decades ago, but we constantly see that more people call us than we can provide the services in government. So we've recently implemented what we call virtual hold, and I think many of you have used it or heard of it. But what it does is, you know, when you call in, it marks your place in line, but instead of you having to stay on hold, it will keep your place, why they call it virtual hold, and then call you back in your place in line. And I just wanted to share with you, you know, for us, in the first 6 months we implemented it, we saved taxpayers 10 million minutes of hold time. That equated to $170,000 worth of toll calls that we were paying for that we didn't have to pay. So in less than a year, we paid for this project. And the other things that I just wanted to, you know, if you've dealt with a call center, you get a lot of abandoned calls. People call and hang up, call and hang up. Our percentage of abandoned calls went down 78%. 63% of the people that called that we offered the virtual hold to said, yeah, I'll take that. You know, they'd prefer to be able to go do whatever they wanted and just let us call them back. And we were able to get a hold of 89% of the people when we did the call back. So this is one that, you know, I think it gets overused when people say a win-win, but this is one that we feel our customers, we get all sorts of positive things. We love virtual hold. You know, it just makes it less taxing dealing with a tax agency. And it's not very expensive or hard to implement. So if you, to me, I just wanted to kind of give a plug for it, because I think it it makes the experience of dealing with government better, and it will save you money in the long term as well.
Share with us your top 3 lessons learned from implementing a big data project.
So it probably won't surprise you when you think about a tax agency. We're a bunch of accountants. So we really care about cost, how long it takes us to do things, and how much money we can bring in for those things. So one of the really big things that we do is case selection. So I just wanted to give you that kind of background as I talk about big data. And so the 3 things I would really encourage people to think about if they start on a project, I think the first thing is make sure that the project is a burning platform. What is a problem that your business has that they really need a solution for? Something that's really on fire for them, that they really matter to them. And like, for example, with us, you know, we have 14 million personal income tax returns. People do not like to get audited and then have no change to their audit. They get very frustrated. You know, it's a waste of time for them. We see that as intrusion. That's kind of a waste of time for us as well. So making better case selection is really important to us, and we've used big data to help us improve our, so we are choosing better cases that make more money for the state. So number 1 is choose something that's a burning platform. If you're at lottery, you want to have, you know, do we have the right mix of tickets that are products we're selling? So make sure don't get something obscure. Make sure you do something that's really painful that your business customer really cares about. The second thing I would say is, while people always say, let's do something small, don't worry about speed or scale. We've learned that we don't take that too seriously from our customer. Most things we listen quite carefully, but speed and scale always matters to your customer. So people say, oh, we can run those queries out in the evening after they becomes part of their daily, how they're doing business. Doing a query in the evening is never going to be okay. I think we as a society have become very used to on demand, having answers, so plan for that. Scott talked about the change just in traffic accidents when we now want to know things immediately. So plan for that as you work on your big data implementation. And the last thing I would say, the quality and quantity of data really matters. And here I just want to articulate to this, and to the point that we've talked about, we are very much, all data is not equal. Some data matters a lot more, and people, I think because of there's been all this written about big data, people just assume the more data, the better. And our ISO will constantly tell us data that you're not using is a liability to us, because that just means that we could lose that data if we're not using it. She's all for if we have business needs for it, but if we don't have data that you're not going to use. And don't just assume because you have the data, it'll be useful and good. We really have found that if you're going to do case selection, there's certain data elements that are far more predictive and important, and we want to spend time on those data elements and make sure that data quality, which is the second piece, is really good. Because that data quality can really mislead you and give you the kind of results that aren't helpful. And kind of just to sum it up, I think that this big data movement is really important. I tease my team and tell them, you know, without data, the HIPPO rule applies. And what is the HIPPO rule? The highest paid person's opinion always rules. And I think data has shown, and we've been able to show in our organization, I just think back to when we first came up with our website, we had some of the most heated discussions on who should be on the front page and what order. And finally, I think the team was tired of every executive thinking their piece was the most important. They came out with, here's the data of who's using it, and it changes per month. And so they just put this very logical, here's the data, here's what we should do, here's going to be our approach. And the discussion was over like that. So I think data really makes a difference, and I love the quote, in God we trust, all others bring data.
Thank you, Kathy. We have just a few more questions for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to you, the audience. My next question is for Wayne. Wayne, this is really a two-part question. I'd like to know what has been the major obstacle over at Corrections and Rehabilitation beginning its road to big data, and then I'd like you to share on top of that, what is the biggest challenge in getting programs to participate in data governance?
Jimmy, we don't have any challenges at Corrections. Everything's perfect. No, seriously. The challenges we've had at Corrections are, we just implemented a huge enterprise system, so we retired multiple legacy applications. So with each legacy application, you have a particular group that uses that legacy application. So for a long, long time, they've had their special application that they called the shots on. They determined who saw the data that was within it. They determined who had access to it. They determined the business rules around the data. They determined all that just on their own. So what we did with our enterprise system was take everybody that was in their individual sandbox and we put them in one big sandbox, hoping that they would play well together. Hoping they'd play well together. So it's kind of a summary of a lot of the things that have been mentioned here, but we had two challenges that we had to grapple with was once you put an enterprise application in, it's then pulling the data from that and having the infrastructure to really churn all that data that you're producing every day. And that takes an infrastructure that I think I can speak for most state departments. You don't have just some servers in the back room that you can fire up and throw data on. It doesn't work that way. So we had to, first of all, get the infrastructure in place to churn these terabytes and terabytes of data. But our biggest challenge was once we started putting all this data together and start answering questions like, wow, who owns that particular piece of data? What does it really mean? Getting back to Kathy's comments around data quality, you can have 50 terabytes of data, but if you're not sure which data is really good, if you don't know what it means, and if you don't know who should really see that data, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So our biggest challenge has been getting data governance up off the ground and really instituting data management in our department, which we've kind of done ad hoc previously. So that's kind of the first part. The second part is, in my role in the Office of Research, we're really driving the data analytics and business intelligence for the department. So it puts me on a different side of the conversation where it's real surreal for me to be up here being a proponent of data governance. Because 15 years ago, I probably would have started shaking, having to implement data governance. But being the person responsible for the accuracy of data and what we report, it's of paramount importance to me right now, as well as the security of it. But it's not hard for me to get our major stakeholders within corrections when I just ask them, you've asked for this particular report, you've asked for this particular set of data, how good do you want it to be? How assured do you want to be that you're looking at the right things before you make decisions? I kind of had that round circle moment when Gigi was speaking, talking about how with the number of people retiring, the state as a whole is coming to that road where we're losing a lot of knowledge. And before technology had matured to what it is now, before we had lots of data, we had folks that were making a lot of decisions based on their gut, right? They had been in the field a long time. They had come up through the ranks. They just knew the business, right? So what we're having to do now is we want to take their decision model, take it and apply data to it, and leave it as something that's sustainable for departments so that people that are coming into these jobs and having to make these decisions can use data-based decisions that they know their predecessors have had a hand in modeling. They've had a hand in building, so you're not coming in as the third day a CIO in lottery going, what the heck do I do now? Not that Chris is saying that, but.
Thanks, Wayne. Question for Susan. Susan, your organization deals with all kinds of data for all types of people. Could you share with the audience a little bit about the type of data you deal with and who some of the citizens are that you interact with?
So we have a large amount of data for the state as well as 58 counties. And we're looking at the data right now and looking at consolidation of the data and even the CalCloud through OTEC. But we're also looking at the data as far as what would the public like to see and view and have real-time data for them, as well as what information do we need to display for our internal customers, and so we can work smarter and be able to access the data using any mobile device, anywhere, anytime, including some of the facilities that we run, so that we can work smarter and be able to make wise decisions based on that data.
Could you give us a recent example of how your department has leveraged technology and communicating information to the citizen to provide better information? For instance, the CCLD facility search.
Yes, we recently launched a transparency website for CCLD, which provides a dashboard for citizens so that they can make wise decisions on the facilities for senior care. So for example, if you had, an elder parent that you need to place into a facility, you can view this website and make a wise decision on which facility you would like your parents to be in. And in this website, it lists the address, and it lists any kind of reporting or investigation or audits that the facilities recently had, so that you are fully informed before you make those decisions.
Thank you very much. My last question is for David, and then we'll move to the portion of the event where we interact with you, the audience, so if you can start thinking of your questions for the panel. But David, could you share with us some of the considerations when you're moving your organization to cloud services to store their data and various productivity services?
Sure. So first of all, cloud services means different things to different people. Is it infrastructure in the cloud? Is it software as a service completely hosted? And if you look at some of this history, in the 70s you had mainframes, hosted applications, sold you CPU cycles, and that evolved. And as you got closer to 2000, you had the dot-com revolution, more focused on software as a service, application as a service, or software as a service. Didn't really do that well. Now you have cloud, and again, technology has evolved. You have the ability to scale up, down, and longitudinally for anything. Pretty much you can actually implement something that would take months to implement within a matter of hours because of patterns that can be replicated. So technology is there. Question is, how does an organization, take the Department of Insurance, make this leap and transition into the cloud? And let's take an infrastructure example, or more supported infrastructure. Well, if I want to take my email and have it hosted by somebody, well, I'll assess with the vendor, right? I've got to have a trust relationship with this vendor because they're going to tell me things that I'm going to validate, and some that I'm just going to take at face value because they can't really be validated. And so you do an assessment. You look at tiered layers of security, and there's been a lot of talk about this. What very often people fail to see is that while you might have a hosted environment which is supported, it's your security roadmap or your security plan that actually protects you. You still own the data. You still have to program those controls, and people forget about that. So it's not just a question of cost savings or anything else, or the need for less support. Basically, it's a partnership that goes way beyond just any of that, and ultimately, the state entity in my case are responsible for that. You kind of move across to hosted applications. Most hosted cloud service providers have all of the controls, all of the security in place. You're responsible. You have a good security roadmap, and you think that your data is secure, and then an application comes about that implements middleware, and you expose services to everybody which are ungoverned. Again, it needs to be part of a bigger picture. Governance plays a very important role in this, both from a data security perspective, how you classify and continue to maintain that classification of your data, and how people make changes to your environment.
Could you share with us, I know we've been talking about the pros of big data, but what are some of the concerns as it relates to the Department of Insurance with big data?
Sure. So I'll give you an example. On any given day during business hours, the Department of Insurance has got to be ready to receive a consumer call from up to 38 million Californians. And years ago, the department implemented a case management system with the sole purpose of actually tracking those calls, but also when somebody calls in, if you've had the same question that people have asked every year for several years, that you can actually reach to that resolution of that really quick. As we move forward, well, our challenge now is, well, why does anybody need to call? Why can't we just make it available self-service? And again, that is something that's very doable, but the question is, it's 30 years of data, mining that data, doing all of that analysis, and next would be a hybrid, right? Everybody has a mobile device. What if I actually were to start self-service, determine I needed to call somebody, and then the person answering the call actually has a history of where I was in my self-service so that you can just continue that conversation. Again, a lot of benefit, but a lot of challenges to get to that point.
Thank you for that. We're now to the part of the program where I'd like to open it up to you, the audience, to interact with our panel. I see a couple hands going up, and we also had a handful of questions that came in through social media and registration. So I think we've got a question right here. Catherine, here you go.
Hi, my name's Catherine Hurst with Verizon, and I had a question to your CIOs and your CISOs regarding the challenges that you face when you're trying to explain risk for your security policies for funding. What kind of challenges are you facing from the business side of your agency to ensure that you get the proper funding for the security processes you need to put in place?
Would anyone like to comment on that?
I'll take that one.
Thanks, Barney.
So it's a good question. So did everybody hear the question? What are the challenges as it relates to funding for security? From our perspective, healthcare services, we have a lot of federal dollars that are funneled through our department, and so I think it's important, and I would advocate that across the board with any department that you really have to engage your business people, your business partners, to ensure that they're on board with what you're trying to accomplish. Because it's not only about IT, it's about the business as well too. So you got to be strategic and you got to be collaborative with them in order to ensure that you're going to basically try to get the funds that you need. Oftentimes within our department, and Bill might be able to attest to this as well too, is that we work and we receive some of our funding from our business partners within our department, like our Office of HIPAA Compliance, which basically helps fund a lot of our initiatives as well too. So I think the key point that I would say and advocate for is it's really about being strategic and working with your partners and your stakeholders to ensure that you're working together to achieve a common goal.
I think it really starts with education, and I would say our ISO, she comes in quarterly and talks with our executives, and she really believes in metrics, so she always has metrics on how we are doing on our security posture. And so I think with that quarterly education, it's one of the easiest things to get funded at franchise. We're risk averse. We don't want to lose data. We feel like people trusting us that we do a good job there is part of who we are. And so for us, it's one of the easiest things to get funded.
Yeah, if I may, I did all that. I think, at the board, two things. We have a sense of responsibility as a part of our value-based. We have that responsibility to take care of those businesses and all of that, private, confidential, and sensitive data that comes with that. So we take that very seriously. And as a result of that, there is a shared understanding of the ownership of the risk. So it's not just a CISO group, it's not just IT. Our program areas, to Barney's point, are definitely involved in, let's talk about it. There are some days they would like to shorten the agenda, but there is regular conversations that our risk management team comes in and does regular, to your point, lots of education, training. So we try to keep that information in front of them and really have them, through the education and just awareness of what are the current trends, what's happening, what the consequences of that are. So there's always ways to make it better and improvement, but we really don't see that, that we're really having to fight for the dollars. And again, I think it goes back to our value system and keeping that in front of them.
I wanted to maybe add, at the national level, when a cyber event occurs, there are funds available. FEMA's Scenario 15, you can Google it, they have a number of scenarios for earthquakes, floods, disasters, and the governor has the ability to declare a disaster event for a cyber event that occurs. And so sometimes we talk about the funding beforehand, but what happens when you are in the thick of it and you've had theft occur that affects constituents who may have data that are on your systems? And to date, I don't know that that's been invoked, but the methods and procedures are there in order to employ assistance that enable the vendor community to come in and assist, that enable you to stand up and do things like help folks preserve their identities, and there's a tremendous amount of funding there that's available. And sometimes we always look at funding, how do we fund security apparatus, methods and procedures, but what happens when an event occurs, because that's not a planned event, and most organizations don't have a big piece of risk capital sitting there that they can go ahead and employ to recover it. So I would invite that those are with the state and some of us vendors and others that are out, constituents here attending, that we become familiar with that, and as those events will occur, that there's a method and procedure for us to respond to them.
Thanks. Would anyone else on the panel like to comment on Catherine's question? David.
My comment is related. So it goes back to Dr. Mukamala's, explanation of how the role of information security officer has kind of diversified with more of a technology focus. Well, as a CIO, I operate in for the last 15 years in state service in a structure that is managed by data processing managers set up 30 years ago. So I think a lot of rethinking has got to be done in how IT itself is structured from a civil service perspective, because otherwise you end up with a really cool project delivering a lot of stuff, but you don't have that structure to support it ongoing. So I think that's an issue.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. Anyone else like to comment before we go to the next question? Okay, do you have a question, gentleman back here? Let me.
My name is Jason with DTSC, and I think Stacey, you talked about how you had gone to VoIP. I had a lot of, in some areas, pushback and a lot of what can we do. And you said you got a 3 months ROI in your VoIP. Did you have any difficulties going to VoIP on your road to that, switching over? And then I guess in part of it, my CIO's on board, but some of the other people aren't quite on board. So I guess, was it all just dollars and cents that you had to convince them, or extra pitching?
Thank you for the question. One of the advantages that we had at Covered California is we were moving our headquarters. So we moved our headquarters from downtown out to 1601 Exposition. Given that fact, we were recabling that facility. When we first went to move, we were getting some pushback and putting voice and data on the same lines. To hedge that bet, we actually put in an extra data feed through the building, in which if we had not done that, our ROI would have been at installation even before. But just in going to VoIP, we saved $100,000 right off the bat in the cabling, because we didn't have to cable up for voice. So, so yes, we did incur some pushback. It's more of an education perspective in understanding how it works. We did a host-based solution there on premise, which is very manageable for the limited staff that we had for the implementation. Very simple, very easy, and it wasn't just dollars and cents, but it was also functionality. And we did demos of the phone product, and it was actually going to the unified communications. We didn't implement it all at once. Currently, they're still in process of finishing up the unified communications instance, but it's that tight integration between mobile technology, so that when you walk into your office with your cell phone, it'll actually transfer the call from your cell phone, right onto the desk phone. It knows that you're there. So things like that haven't been fully implemented yet, because it's going, you can't go from 0 to 1,000 all in one jump. And so it was a measured implementation and a phased implementation. All the features and functionalities are there, it's just as you turn them up. So it increased efficiency, the usability of the product is fabulous, the voice quality exceptional, and the tie-in with the video conferencing as well, where you can actually get a video conference and conference in right from your iPad or your mobile device, even from your phone. So wherever the person is that you need to contact, they have immediate connection into a conference, which it increases the communication. And if something's easy to use and well received, it really benefits everyone. But I'm sure, I can get you in contact with Julie Baker or Brenda O'Brien at Covered California, and they'd be, I'm sure, more than happy to give you a demo of that and help with that. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to comment?
I would add that as you embark upon your endeavors to implement such a technology, that I think it's important to have a strategic plan in place with change management. Change management is important to folks, and one of the main tenets of change management is really about communication and embracing. So I think if you have that kind of a strategic initiative in place that's really going to talk about, your change management processes and communication and education, I think you'll find yourself in a much better position. And it's not to say that you're not doing that, but my advocacy is really about having a kind of a strategic roadmap in place. Healthcare services, we just recently published our healthcare innovation strategy, which really entails quite a bit of that information about strategic initiatives, how we're going to emphasize and move towards a better environment, increasing our business efficiencies, and along with that is really about change management and how we're going to execute against it. So good luck to you.
Well, and one of the other things that we did do is in regards to training. So we actually had training classes. I think it was about 6 hours a day, every day for the first 2 weeks, and we scheduled everyone through it. And it was interesting because the vendor was surprised that every class was full. And typically when they do these implementations in the private sector, they get maybe 10 people in these classes, and we had, 10 and they filtered off very quickly. Typically in private sector, they were not expecting the response from the Covered California folks. And we also had put into, worked out with the vendor that every month for new employees, that they actually train them. They have a training class once a month to train all new employees on the technology.
Would anyone else like to comment before we go to the next question? Barney, one of the interesting questions, we had a multitude of questions come in through the internet, and one of them was for your agency, and I said, given the critical nature of cloud computing, what options are there to create diversity in the networks to ensure uptime?
Wow, that's a tough question, huh? I think really the main tenets of that is really about your architecture, what kind of an architecture you're going to have in place to ensure that you have that kind of uptime. A lot of times we often try to strive for what they call 5 nines of availability. I'm sure a lot of you know what that is, but that really equates to like 5 minutes of downtime per year. It's always nice to be able to go that route, but, it costs money as well, too. So I'm of the opinion that there's no single point of failure within an environment. So on that note, to be able to ensure that you have that kind of uptime, I think it's important getting back to the architecture, how you're architected and how the topology is set up to ensure that you have those kind of diversity for data paths to basically traverse in the event there is a failure, which gets back to the no single point fundamental failure concept is that as there is a failure, the data automatically reroutes, and having the types of protocols in place to basically ensure that, as from a linked state point of view, that data basically finds its way to another environment. So on that note, I can't emphasize enough that it's really about the architecture, the topology that's going to be put into place to ensure that you're going to have that kind of an uptime for a cloud service environment. And really, some of that really is, the onus is really going to be on the cloud service provider. They have to ensure that, for us, given the kind of nature and the kind of data that we have within our environment and who we serve up in terms of our constituents, we have a very large data warehouse within the Department of Healthcare Services. We really look at the architecture and the topology from a cloud service provider as we're working with Caltech on their new offering from an infrastructure point of view. Their main service right now is infrastructure as a service. One of the main things that we are looking at is how the architect is in place. IBM was the main contractor, so they ensure us that they're going to have an environment that's going to provide us that kind of uptime and that kind of service availability for our constituents.
Anyone else have a comment on that?
I have a bit of a comment and maybe more informal question. Barney may remember some of this from our alleged data center days, and that is when you're talking about that cloud service and making that 5 nines high availability. For most organizations, definitely government organizations, real high availability is expensive. And so one of the things that I recall even at the data center and some of in my current space that you think about is also prioritizing what functionality or what services are most mission critical to your business. And I would ask Barney if you feel like that's that would be in line, because you can't make everything available all the time. I mean, it's a nice theory, but it's costly and it's hard to sustain that. And so I think one of the things that, in my experience is also going through and saying what are the most mission critical systems. And then you kind of apply the high availability ranking to that set of capabilities and functionality. And then you might compromise a little bit on the lower end. And then having some sort of a routine or protocol in place that says when something goes down, what is the strategy for bringing those high performance or the mission critical applications and features and functions back online. I don't know that in government we can afford to do, we'd love to, but I don't know.
No, I'm not going to argue that point, trust me, because it does cost a lot of money. You cannot have every piece of data or every piece of your environment that's going to give you that kind of high availability. So Brenda does have a very good point. And getting back to our days of alleged data, we had many challenges over there, but I can say that we were successful. So
can I add one thing? I agree that the cost is prohibitive, and we have every application is either platinum, gold, or silver, and that's really works well with our customers too, so they know the expectation, and so that you can, when you have a platinum service go out, everyone knows that that is the most important. So I think it helps with communication with your customers, your own team, knowing the priority, and just a way, because you cannot do it all. You cannot afford it all.
One last comment, if I may. I know Servinas kind of mentioned about having all your data, knowing what your data is doing. I think in reference to that question, in reference to the architecture, I think having security event information and management solution tool sets in place that helps you to understand what's going on with your data and how the environment is functioning for you, so you can get those kind of alerts and those kind of messaging that tells you what's happening within the environment.
And I was just going to jump in because I think what you said about having the architecture is really critically important to have the architecture, but also along with that of what's your plan? And so when things go down, and I take, for example, we have our 911 call centers. It wouldn't go over very well if we went out and couldn't answer any 911 calls. And so we try and build as much redundancy in, but we also can divert calls between call centers. So if one center goes down, we can divert the calls to another call center so that those calls can continue to be taken. But you got to have the plan, and you got to figure out where that data goes and what you're going to do when those failures happen. And if you don't have the plan, then you're scrambling trying to put out a fire, as opposed to we know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, get it done quickly.
I want to add one other thing, is our data center, if your data center is not co-located with you and it's at OTEC, you need to ensure that that connection is redundant, because that data, that machine might be working and humming along just fine, but if your connection to that data is broken, it won't matter because you can't get to it or your folks can't get to it. So that's important to ensure that you have that redundancy, those redundancy pieces in place.
I wanted to add one other piece. We're also looking at going to the cloud with some of our applications, and I think it's important to project the growth of that data because projecting the growth will allow you to house the data correctly and have the infrastructure set up so that you can be prepared for the future growth of, say, 3 years, 5 years out. So you know and can predict the data backups and the data recovery of that data.
I think the good thing is if things go down completely, it's easy to restore them. But that's really an interesting thing in cybersecurity, right? If it breaks, you'll restore it, if not 5 minutes, in 15 hours. The problem is when you have a continuous attack, how do you operate your business without shutting down your business? See, that's where the cloud is going to pose an extremely challenging problem because you rely on one single point. Of course, you have sharding, you have 5 geolocations. But the problem is if your data is compromised in one place, you're exactly replicating the same stuff in 5 other places. All these 5 places are now corrupted. Now, you can't use any one of them. You still have to operate while you're fixing your corruption. So I think that will pose a very interesting challenge as we move forward. As data convergence happens, you're replicating the exact same data for disaster recovery because we're using 10 years old technology in replication. Now, during a cyber attack, that replication might not be your best friend. That'll be your worst nightmare. Now you have to go clean all 5 places, and that's 5x your expense of recovering from a cyber attack. Instead, you had only 1x to recover. So those are the kind of things will be very important to consider, like what Bonnie was talking about architecturally. How do I make sure when I'm replicating, I'm not replicating the bad problem as well? So, I mean, nobody knows the answer to that, by the way. It's a very hard problem. And if I've known the answer, I would not been here today. I've been sitting with a VC to raise more capital in California. so it's a real hard problem. It is a real scientific problem people are still trying to solve. And how do we make sure we don't replicate bad stuff over and over again and get into a very unsolvable situation? So.
Hi, good morning. John Thomas Flynn from Tech Leader TV. I'm going to try to articulate this question without losing my day job here, but I want to go back to something that Wayne said earlier about a data governance issue, because it's been my experience as CIO and talking to colleagues around the country that the biggest obstacle is data governance, and I don't mean just with the mid-level bureaucrats, I mean at the highest level. For example, when you use big data and go after it, and this is strictly hypothetical now, but if you have a $50 billion plus Medi-Cal program, and sources say empirically you could have 10% fraud, you know, that's $5 billion of fraud. Is Secretary Dooley, is the governor, are they willing to acknowledge that problem and go after it? It's very, very difficult to find those champions. And the same thing could be said, you know, at food stamps. The same thing could be said if you identify an agency that may have 40, 50, 60% of disability retirements. There's so many political issues that enter into this. How do you get champions? How do you find the champions at the executive level to support you in these endeavors? Because I know Brenda and Kathy, it's easy to go after tax cheats, but it's a lot more difficult to go after you know, people that have beneficiaries of programs or doctors. It's much more political. How do you address that?
I was going to say, feel free.
Such a light question.
I think there's always people in government who want to make a difference, and you need to find champions who, I mean, that's where I think find a burning platform. There's lots of them in government. There's lots of things we can do. Find something that people are passionate about, get your champion, and start. Because I don't think there's just one right answer to any problem. And I'd start with the passion and the champion and then go from there.
So I would echo what Kathy said. You know, at the Department of Corrections, it's a little different. We've had this thing called realignment happen to us. So, and we've had, you know, we're in court cases and everything else. So we've had stressors on our department that typically open up people's minds to different ideas. So what's happened in our department is the need to manage our offender population, our parolee populations, to really get down to such in the weeds data has really driven the need and gotten their interest in, you know, one data source is one thing, but when you're bringing data from multiple data sources and you're not sure if, you know, you mentioned fraud, you know, if I'm bringing in data from 3 different data sources, data source 1 says this, data source 2 and 3 say something different, how much confidence do I have in those other data sources? We've had some success taking examples to our business leaders within corrections and saying, look, here's the problem as the Deputy Director of Office of Research I'm having a hard time with because I don't know these things. Help me get to know those things. And we've gotten some sponsorship, you know, behind that, and our secretary's firmly behind that. So that's how we've done it. Our mission's a little bit different. You know, Kathy before mentioned, you know, looking at cases and looking at tax cases is one thing, but looking at offender cases is a little bit different, different variables, but it's much the same thing. So that's how we've been successful.
What I would add from a healthcare services perspective is having enlightened executive sponsorship and engaged executive sponsorship makes all the difference in the world. We don't have to make a business case about is there fraud or not. It's a question of what are the right technological platforms and tools to surface that those patterns of fraud, if you will. And I think that's been a real priority for the department, particularly over the last year.
David.
Again, you can actually try and address a much bigger issue, which is difficult, or go at the root cause of some of these areas. So from my experience with correctional healthcare, you know, you have referrals. How the private sector deals with it is limit the opportunity for someone to go and have a frivolous doctor's visit. Private sector has implemented something called utilization management. It's not uncommon for someone to get a letter from the insurance company saying this is denied. Correctional healthcare implemented that, so the possibility of someone kind of invoicing or charging for services kind of gets reduced. Validation of data, well, somebody has got to go make an appointment, again, this is related to the correctional system. If you can validate that somebody left the premises, that their logs indicated that they were at the destination and came back, the probability of that was a valid approved visit and happened is more. So there's a lot you can do while trying to address the bigger issue also.
Dave.
Overall system, looking at the whole system is really sometimes tough to do. I'll use a comparison. A year ago, I had a neck fusion done. My left arm quit working. And I was running through life, you know, happy until, oh, wow, my left hand's not working. What's going on here? Go in and have the pictures taken and find out massive problems with a nervous system thing in the neck. And I didn't see that coming, but it had been attenuating over time. And now I was dealing with the crisis and was able to get it fixed, and hey, it was fixed and great to go. But that these system problems where you're looking at fraud, where you're looking at inefficiencies, where you're looking at sometimes that attenuation occurs gradually over time. From a carrier's perspective, you know, we'll see geometric growth and bandwidth, and everybody will say, wow, we're getting so much traffic and everything else. But then when you take a step back and look, how much of that has malicious signature intent? How much of that is, when you start looking at the payload of it, you find out, you know what, we're not growing. We're experiencing some attenuation and efficiency that needs to be addressed. And that's what's hard to communicate to those that hold the purse strings, to say, hey, we want to do this efficiency project, or we want to do this investigative project, because they don't understand that growth. But I always like to use this, you know, similar to my neck situation. It was a crisis when it occurred, but it had found its root cause years in the making.
Two things is, one, you got to have the kind of system in place that's going to basically validate the data as they were referring to here to my left. I think it's important. It speaks for itself in terms of fraud. And then what Bill is referring to about executive sponsorship, you know, healthcare services, we are heavily involved in that kind of an effort. So having that kind of an executive sponsorship from our directorate, Director Douglas, and our Chief Deputy Director, Karen Johnson, without those kind of champions in place, if you will, that can look at that data and show that data and then and then show Secretary Dooley that, look, this is what's going on. I think it's important to have the kind of technologies in place to basically help you validate and build your case. But getting down to the basics, once you get it and you do all the link analysis, it speaks for itself.
Good point. Folks, I realize that we're at 11 o'clock. I've asked the panel if they could stay a little bit longer. I know we have a few more questions coming in. So what we'll do, we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up here shortly. I know this gentleman right here has a question.
So now here, Dr. Srinivas and also Dave kind of touched upon this a little. You were basically touching upon disaster, right? So what are some of your experiences around disaster recovery and how do you really kind of plan for it, right?
You're deferring?
No, I mean, I can't.
We're working on several disaster recovery plans within the agency, and we partnered with OTEC to start up the disaster recovery location so that we can start testing and making sure the data will be available when we need it during a disaster. So it is quite challenging keeping up the documentation for disaster recovery, but it's a plan that always has to be revisited with every 6 months just to make sure that it is intact, but it's important to test that disaster recovery plan as well.
I mean, that's a very good point, right? I mean, I said, what is your biggest enemy? It's data is your biggest enemy. I mean, it's your friend, it's your enemy, it's your foe. I mean, depending on which day you look at it. And when you start collecting data, like Brenda was talking, right, we have to be selective. Barney was saying we have to be selective what data we're going to replicate. So with collecting all kinds of data, there is no way you can have an exact replica. Nobody has that kind of money unless you're one of the federal government agencies that protects the President of the United States. So, I mean, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and then you have to know your data and the type of data you want to involve in a disaster recovery. And then you just heard you have to test it. The interesting thing is we rarely test disaster recovery plans. We do 6 months, we don't do a full test. We say, okay, we switch off this, let's see if the circuit works. Do you really test the application to be fully functional? I mean, do you let that run for that 1 week and switch back? So those are the kind of things you have to evolve in your disaster recovery testing to be fully functional DR versus just a phony test so you can pass your compliance. So there's a lot of things we are seeing in a lot of state governments. Yes, they do tests for the sake of doing a test so they can check box for their auditor, yes, we passed a DR test. Versus do we truly have a DR? I mean, a lot of cases have proven the answer is no. I'm talking about private sector. Did Target truly have a fully functional DR when an incident happened? The answer is no, because they had to struggle, right? So Chase Manhattan was a good example. After 9/11, they had to struggle for 4 days. So, I mean, that's the world's largest bank. If they can't recover, forget about anybody else recovering, right? I mean, again, those are hypothetical examples. We are mature today, but are we there yet? I mean, the time will tell.
I think your point on testing is really, really important because it's one thing to have a plan, but it's another thing that everybody knows their part of the plan and what to do when it hits. And it's interesting from the standpoint of just emergency response of we've done earthquake drills and we've done fire drills and everything else, but when it hits, you have a bunch of deer in the headlights of, shoot, what do we do? I know we have a disaster recovery plan, where is it? Versus everybody knows their roles, everybody knows their responsibilities, everybody knows where the plan is, and everybody knows their part of the plan, because when everybody knows their part of the plan, it can be implemented quite quickly and quite effectively. But if everybody's struggling trying to figure out, Barney, do you have the plan? Where's the plan? I don't know where the plan is. Do we have a plan? Do we even have a plan? And I think the cycle of writing the plan, keeping the plan updated, but it's also you need to revisit to make sure all the roles and responsibilities are known, because you look at a lot of emergency plans that says that Scott's in charge of this, but Scott moved to a different office 3 years ago. And so I'm not even going to be there, and yet I'm part of the plan. Does my replacement know what their role in the plan is? And so it's basically a continual process that we need to do, and that if we're ready and it happens, we're going to respond well. But if we're not ready and haven't practiced and haven't figured out what we're going to do, it's going to be a struggle.
And just as one quick note on that we're kind of going through, and that is we actually had a little episode not too long ago, and we learned a lot from it. But just as a footnote, a lot of us are modernizing our technologies. And what I encourage my staff to do, and now it's kind of required as a part of what we're doing, is when we go to do the implementation or even upgrades, that we refresh the DR to include all of those changes. Because, you know, we all get busy and you're moving, right? And then somebody comes back a year or two later and realizes, you know, that new functionality you stood up? It's not even in the plan, and the people are there. So we are also making sure that you do touch it on a regular basis. I have a thing where I probably annoy my peers on the executive team because I'm always talking about our DR, almost to annoy them. But the intent of it is, and it's in a friendly way, but the intent of it is to keep it in front of them. Because we have people that are changing all the time. Names are changing, et cetera. So we just want to make sure they're aware of it, what their roles are. And we just had a conversation 2 weeks ago, and they were like, where's the plan? Where's the thing? What's that around your neck? Because we had some of our flash drives. And it's just making sure that people are continually aware of it. One final note, and I kept saying that, but the other thing that was significant for us is we all have those plans, and they're usually for different scenarios that are usually pretty big and pretty catastrophic. Don't forget about the little incidents that can interrupt your day and can take services offline for days. So I would encourage you to not just think about the biggies, but think about, just little things that occur where somebody, we've had issues. Of course, I work for the State Board of Equalization. You might have heard that we have some building problems. So we think about major evacuation of the building, but what happens when the bathroom just happens to be leaking or something small like that is small on that scale, but it limits our access to some mission critical areas. So it's those kinds of things that we have to be prepared to say, then how do we redirect our services and our activities?
We're going to take one more question before we wrap up. Matthew, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Matt Lemire. I work with Cisco. I'm a sales manager that manages the State of California team. First of all, thank all of you for being here. We really appreciate this. Mine's not really a question, more of a comment in response to what Stacey said earlier about wanting to learn how to be more efficient and learn from not only other agencies but other .coms out there. In my very short time at Cisco, I've learned that we have amazing contacts, not only in all the big cities, all the agencies, but in other states and other countries throughout the world that are, and oftentimes have already embarked upon some of the challenges that we're facing here. I just want to, extend a hand and say, if you ever want to talk to them, have us out of the picture, reach out to the vendor community and learn from their mistakes. Please reach out. We'll be happy to put you in touch with them, no matter whom they may be. I'm amazed at how high our arm reaches, and that's just not for my company, but obviously from the rest of the vendor community. We'd be happy to put you in touch with them and learn from everything they've learned from. And that's it.
Before we wrap up, I would ask each of the panelists, and we'll start with Chris, just to give your closing comments. We'll just go right down. Chris?
I'll keep it simple. I think that given the topics here, data security, et cetera, these are all really important things that are getting more and more important every day, and it's great that we're having groups get together to talk about it, share experiences. I think it's important and valuable that we do it more, and it's great that these events can be a mix of whether we're public sector or commercial vendors, et cetera. I think it brings more value to it. So thank you, Jimmy, for having us. And thank you to everyone for being here. And thank you to all the rest of the panelists.
I think to echo Chris's comments, I think we don't do this near enough. I think so many departments are going through the similar evolutions with big data, data security, data classification, data management, data governance, all those Ds, right? You can probably try really hard to make it into a four-letter word, but it's really not. I think the more that we get together and talk about these type of things and share experiences, not just among state departments, but with the vendor community, to make those contacts, to get good lessons learned. I think if I was going to leave you with one thing, it would be that remember that you can get the fastest infrastructure in the world, you can get your security honed in to the best that you can, but at the core of it, if you don't know what your data means, it's meaningless. So really put the vigor around your data management, around your data governance. And I think the benefits of that, when you get the fast machines and you get your security honed in, I think the return on investment will be absolutely huge. Thank you.
Great. I want to echo Gigi's remarks around the state workforce. We're busy investing in technology, infrastructure, some incredible tools that will help us do our jobs much more efficiently and gather data in ways we would not have imagined 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But we also have to invest in a state workforce that can use those tools effectively. And whether it's looking at how do you get someone who's the corollary to a data scientist into a state agency, and Wayne and I were talking about that a little bit earlier, building those technical skill sets, data analytical skill sets in state staff so that you have a sustainable organization using the technology you've procured.
I think the important thing is to understand your data, right? I mean, that's one thing. But you also want to understand your user and your enemy, because it's a two-edged coin. Your user who is using your data for the good thing might be something else. Somebody can use it against you. So you want to understand your data to see who really wants it at the same time for good use and bad use. I think that's the most important thing. Once we understand that behavioral aspect, then you can at least have some form of a judgment call on this activity might be bad versus this is a legitimate activity. I think that's a very important thing for organizations to mature in understanding the behavioral aspects of data use. And to talk on the workforce, California has a nice steering committee on really generating this data security scientists at a very grassroots level. They're talking K to 20. How do we bring this up in schools and colleges before even they come into the workforce? I mean, I know you're interested in the state workforce, but it's a national problem today. And Dave was talking about FEMA, and he was talking about the civil guard for cyber. Last year was the first year the United States passed a bill. There will be a civil guard to solve cybersecurity problems. And after they signed the bill, they found out that we don't even have 2% of the workforce we need to do the civil guard. So it's a yeah, we have a policy, but there is no mechanism to support that. I think that's one thing that needs to be promoted as state employees or state functionaries to go into this ecosystem and say, well, there are good opportunities. Why don't you guys start teaching it very early on? So I think that's a very important thing to do. One, preserve at the top on the leadership, at the same time have the pyramid built so there's a foundation to support the leadership.
I think it's important when you talk about big data and telecommunications and security to look at the data and provide the data that's necessary to the public so they can do and provide self-help and get access to the data that they really need in their day-to-day life, as well as internal agencies having them use mobile devices and be able to access the data anywhere, anytime, with any device.
And I'd like to echo what Susan and the other panelists had indicated in regards to, any data anywhere in a mobile workforce and actually a mobile society. I think that's, we've seen that that's where it's going. Not everybody may have a computer at home, but almost everyone has a smartphone. And, they want to be able to access information and get done what they need to get done. And so that's one of the things to really take a look at and keep in mind. But I wanted to thank all of you guys for coming, and thank you, Jim, for orchestrating this. It's been, I think, very beneficial, not only to the panelists, but to the folks in the audience as well.
Thank you. As I've been listening and participating in the conversation, one thing I'd like to say is that we as leaders need to work together more. Particularly as we put the infrastructure in place, we put the governance in place. It doesn't make sense to build it many times. Let's build it once, let's build it right, let's collaborate on the best way to deliver it. Maybe even looking at it from an agency perspective, or just a state of California perspective. Big data is here. We need to learn how to do it correctly. Workforce is clearly an issue. So we're just going to have fewer resources. So we're going to have to band together and work, differently and much more collaboratively. So I'm glad to have been able to share some thoughts with you all. CalTRANS is a wonderful employer, and so if you're looking at coming to an organization that can get you going, that you can look forward to waking up every morning to say, what can I do? give me a call.
It's exciting to see this group. I participated in a couple panels around the world in my career, and it's a wonderful feeling to know, first of all, it's incredible there's so many CIOs in the state of California with all these agencies, but really that's a microcosm of what a great place it is that we live and we work and we participate in. There are forums and rooms like this all over this planet that would be throwing shoes at each other, would be fighting, would be, and maybe behind the scenes that occurs, but we've got this great opportunity. And you've got the great Stan Lee, the comic artists of the world, that where great power becomes great responsibility. And I think Dumbledore, as I read that to my kids, has similar kinds of things. And we're talking about these big data initiatives and security and data assurance, and these are big topics, but we're also having a great discussion. And the science, technology, and engineering discussion that we need to have with our K through 20 folks to raise up the next workforce, those are real issues. But I just appreciate that we have an open forum where we're able to come and discuss these things in relative safety, peace, and security, and talk about things without having the burdens of what a lot of the citizenry of the planet is dealing with. So it's just a great time to be here. Thanks.
I would like to echo what everyone has to say here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. I agree that we need to have these discussions further. We should have more governance around big data. But we could have all that, and the technology is fun and easy to build. But I think some of the things that we really probably should be focused on as well, in addition to all this, is the legal parameters around big data and the sharing of big data. It's a big factor, and it hinders us quite a bit in terms of how we can basically move towards interoperability and sharing. So on that note, thank you. And does everybody have one of these? I just want to make sure you pick up one of these, because the next time you're cruising down the road and you're looking at your phone, just give them Scott's name. So that way, because Scott says that they're doing this, so just tell them that Scott from the CHP said that, yeah, we can do this. And relative to what Gigi's saying, healthcare services is the place to go, because we have a newer building and we have a complex environment. So, and their building, I think, was just retrofitted for earthquake seismic problems a few years ago.
We have many
my wife
buildings.
worked there. So
we have many buildings throughout California.
So nice to know that we're ending on a scandalous, shameless, but for BOE.
Oh, no.
So I do. First of all, I just want to thank Jimmy for organizing this, and your organization and the sponsors for organizing this and giving us all an opportunity to be here and participate. I enjoy teamwork, and I enjoy information sharing. Remember, when you're in kindergarten, you learn to share. Was a big value, and so basically that's what we're doing. We're in one state, we're in a great state called California. I do believe that we should all work together to make Californians, our agencies and our companies successful, because it's on behalf of our citizens, who we should take great pride in. That said, I think the takeaway for me, and one of the things that I practice, is we might be government, but we're going to be the best at government. And so I encourage you to look at commercial space in the private sector, because they're doing really good things with big data, in a number of spaces, but specifically in big data. So we look for that as our model. We absolutely do look at our other organizations and share information, lessons learned, et cetera. But I think to the extent that we could learn what's going on in private industry and model after that, they're doing some cool things, and I think we can take great advantage of that. And if we do that and work together, I think California goes back to the top of the map in terms of all things outstanding.
So I will just say ditto on the thanks to everyone involved, because you've heard that a few times already. And I guess what I would just say, as far as I would just challenge all of us, every time, I think 9/11, it became very clear to me, people expected government to work together and it to be seamless and not bureaucratic. And I would just challenge all of us to, continue that expectation. We have things like earthquakes and just even day-to-day business that can be bureaucratic to start a new business or stop a new business. And I think we can do more to work together to make it easier for citizens. And that, to me, that's why, there's problems that need solved. We need to work together to solve them. And I just would challenge all of us to do that more so and be that bold leader that makes that difference.
I'd like to thank Jamie for inviting me to participate. I'd just like to say that the topic, big data, cloud, they're driven by very mature technologies. They're here to stay. The more organizations plan and tie any transition to the value that it will bring them, the more successful they'd be at this.
I just want to say, Barney, it's great to have the last word. So if I could actually have the flyers, I have a few friends that I want to share Barney's picture with. Actually, on a serious note, it's been interesting just listening to the conversation and thinking about the one theme that I really picked up on was discipline. And when you look at the different things that we need to do to ensure quality of our data, to ensure security, we have to have discipline. We have to discipline to change the password on a refrigerator. We have to have discipline to make sure we do our security updates. We have to have discipline to make sure we have our disaster recovery plan. We have to have discipline to make sure we have good quality data. And so I think that theme goes across everything to make sure we have the discipline to do all those things that we need to do to get it done and get it done right so that we are leaders and we have top-of-the-line IT as we serve the people of California. But there is one change of paradigm that I need to point out because we've said any data, anywhere. I want to change the mindset, any data, almost anywhere, please not while driving.
I would just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Integra and Keynes, for putting on this event. I'd also like you to join me in a round of applause for our esteemed panel. On behalf of the Public Sector Technology thing, thank you for joining today's Thought Leadership Forum on Big Data, Security, and Telecom in the state of California. Good day.